The wedding sheets still smelled of him. Elena Blackwood pressed her back against the cold bark of a pine tree, her lungs burning with each ragged breath, and tried to force the memory away. But it clung to her like the frost settling on her bare arms. Marcus's weight beside her, his voice soft in the darkness. The way he'd traced circles on her shoulder before the door had opened. Before she had walked in. 3 hours. That was how long Elena had been his wife, before Vivian Crane had appeared in their bedchamber doorway, her silver hair tumbling over bare shoulders, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Did you really think he wanted you?" Vivian had laughed, the sound cutting through Elena's confusion. "Oh, you poor stupid girl. He needed your father's alliance. The wedding night was just theater." Elena's hand drifted to her stomach now, pressing against the small curve hidden beneath her torn dress. 3 months. She'd told Marcus about the pregnancy that morning, her heart so full she thought it might burst. He'd smiled, kissed her forehead, called her his perfect mate. Lies. Everything had been lies. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind her, and Elena's wolf surged forward, flooding her senses with hyper-awareness. She could smell pine needles and frozen earth, could hear the distant howl of pack wolves on the hunt, hunting her. She forced her legs to move, stumbling over a root, catching herself against another tree. Her feet were bleeding. She'd left her shoes somewhere miles back, kicked them off when the formal slippers had slowed her down. The thin wedding dress offered no protection against the mountain cold, and she'd stopped feeling her fingers an hour ago. "Keep moving," she told herself. "Stop and die." The decree had come from Marcus's own lips, spoken in that same gentle voice he'd used to promise her forever. "Elena Blackwood is hereby declared rogue. She has betrayed her mate and alpha with another male's child. Kill on sight." Another male's child. A sob tore from Elena's throat, and she clamped her hand over her mouth to muffle it. There had been no other male. There had only ever been Marcus, her childhood sweetheart, her promised mate, the man she'd given everything to. The baby growing inside her carried his blood, his features, his claim. But Vivian had whispered poison in his ear, and Marcus had chosen to believe it. Or perhaps he'd simply wanted to believe it. Perhaps the lie gave him permission to do what he'd always planned, discard Elena like a used vessel and take the female he actually wanted. "She went north," a voice shouted from somewhere behind her. "I've got her scent." Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. The northern forest stretched endless and unfamiliar before her, territories she'd only heard of in warnings and legends. She had no pack, no protection, no destination. Only the desperate animal need to run until her legs gave out. "Please," she prayed to the moon goddess, to any power listening, "please let my baby live. I don't care about myself anymore. Just let my baby live." The forest floor sloped sharply downward, and Elena half ran, half slid through the underbrush, branches tearing at her dress and arms. Blood welled from a dozen scratches, hot against her frozen skin. She could feel the pack wolves gaining ground, 5 of them, maybe 6, their howls growing closer with every passing minute. She would not make it to dawn. The certainty settled over her like a burial shroud, cold and absolute. She was 3 months pregnant, exhausted, injured, and being hunted by wolves who knew these woods far better than she did. When they caught her, when, not if, they would tear her apart in the snow. Marcus's orders. Marcus's final gift to the wife he'd never wanted. Elena's foot caught on something, and she went down hard, her shoulder slamming against frozen ground. For a moment she simply lay there, gasping, staring up at the silver moon through a canopy of pine branches. So beautiful, she thought dimly. At least the last thing I see will be beautiful. Her wolf snarled at the submission, clawing against Elena's exhausted surrender. "Get up, move, fight. Our pup needs us." The thought of the baby, the tiny life flickering inside her, unaware of the chaos above, gave Elena the strength to drag herself upright. Her dress was soaked through now, clinging to her legs like wet hands. Ice crystals had formed in her dark hair. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. But she moved. One step. Another. Her wolf lending her strength she no longer possessed alone. The trees began to thin, and Elena stumbled into a small clearing, moonlight flooding the snow-covered ground. She took 3 more steps before she registered the figures emerging from the shadows. Not Marcus's wolves. These wolves were larger, their fur ranging from pure white to deepest black, their eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. They moved in perfect formation, surrounding her without haste, without the snarling aggression of her former packmates. Territory markers? Elena realized, her wolf going still with dawning horror. I crossed into claimed territory. She'd been so focused on running from that, she hadn't paid attention to where she was running to. Shift, a voice commanded from the darkness. A female stepped forward, her silver hair cropped short, her posture radiating authority. You are trespassing in Silvermane territory, rogue. Alpha King Silvermane will determine your fate. Alpha King. The words cut through Elena's exhaustion like ice water. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. Dante Silvermane, the Alpha King who had ruled the northern territories for 2 centuries, whose power was said to rival the ancient wolves. Cold, they called him. Merciless. A king who hadn't taken a mate in 200 years, who judged trespassers without sentiment or mercy. She had run from one death directly into another. Please, Elena heard herself whisper, her hand pressing against her stomach. My baby. Silver chains materialized from somewhere, wrapping around her wrists before she could react. The metal burned against her skin, and Elena screamed, her wolf howling in agony as the silver's poison spread through her veins. The Alpha King will decide, the female repeated, her voice utterly flat. If your child is innocent, he will show mercy. If you are a spy or assassin, you will die before dawn. Elena's vision blurred as the wolves shifted, rough hands gripping her arms, dragging her forward through the snow. The moon hung overhead, silver and indifferent, offering no comfort or hope. Moon goddess, Elena prayed one final time as darkness crept into the edges of her sight. If I am to die tonight, please let it be swift. But deep in her chest, her wolf stirred with something that felt almost like anticipation. A whisper of heat, a flicker of impossible recognition, as if some part of Elena already knew that death was not what waited for her in the Alpha King's throne room. The throne room swallowed her whole. Elena's knees struck marble so cold it burned through the torn fabric of her wedding dress. The silver chains had been removed somewhere between the forest and here, but the raw welts on her wrists still throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of her captivity. Guards flanked her on either side, their presence unnecessary. She could barely keep herself upright, let alone attempt escape. Torches lined the massive hall, their flames casting dancing shadows across walls of dark stone. Banners bearing the Silvermane crest hung from vaulted ceilings, silver wolves embroidered on fields of midnight blue. The room stretched impossibly long, every surface designed to make those who entered feel small, insignificant, utterly at the mercy of the power that ruled here. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of black granite, sat the throne. Elena's wolf went rigid inside her, pressing against her ribs with sudden, desperate urgency. She forced her gaze to remain on the floor, counting the veins of silver that ran through the marble, trying to slow her racing heart. She could feel the weight of attention from the gathered wolves, courtiers, advisors, guards, all watching the captured rogue with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Alpha King Silvermane, the silver-haired female announced, her voice echoing through the hall. We present to you the rogue captured crossing our northern border. She claims to be with child." Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Elena flinched at the word rogue, at the way it reduced her to something less than wolf, less than person. 3 hours ago she had been Luna of her pack. Now she was nothing. Footsteps descended from the dais. Heavy, deliberate. Each one sending vibrations through the marble that Elena felt in her bones. Her wolf surged forward with a keening cry that made no sense, straining toward the approaching presence with an intensity that bordered on pain. Elena's fingers curled against the cold floor, her breath coming faster. Something was wrong. Something was happening inside her that she couldn't control or understand. "What are you doing?" she demanded of her wolf. "He's going to kill us." But her wolf wasn't listening. Her wolf was whining, pressing against her skin, flooding her senses with desperate primal need. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. "Look at me." The voice rolled through the throne room like distant thunder, deep and commanding, carrying the weight of centuries. It was not a request. It was not even an order in the traditional sense. It was simply truth, an absolute statement of reality that her body moved to obey before her mind could protest. Elena raised her head, and the world fractured. He stood close enough that she could have touched him if her hands weren't pressed flat against the marble for balance. Tall, impossibly tall, his shoulders broad beneath a coat of black velvet trimmed in silver. Dark hair fell past his collar, slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His jaw was sharp, shadowed with stubble, his features harsh and beautiful in the way of ancient sculptures. But it was his eyes that destroyed her. Silver. Pure, molten silver, like moonlight given form and consciousness. They bore into her with an intensity that stripped away every defense she'd ever built, every wall she'd ever raised, leaving her raw and exposed beneath his gaze. Heat exploded through Elena's chest. It started at her core and radiated outward in waves, flooding her veins with liquid fire, making her skin prickle with awareness so acute it bordered on pain. Her wolf howled, not in fear, not in warning, but in recognition so absolute it left no room for doubt. Mate. The word echoed through every fiber of her being, impossible and undeniable and completely, terrifyingly wrong. This was the Alpha King, the cold ruler who showed no mercy, the male who had gone 2 centuries without claiming a mate because no female was worthy of standing beside him. And her wolf was crying out for him like he was the other half of her soul. Dante Silvermane's hand shot out, gripping her chin with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly against her skin. His eyes widened, silver bleeding into gold at the edges, his pupils contracting to sharp points. A low growl built in his chest, not threatening, but something far more primal. Something that made Elena's wolf press forward with answering need. "Impossible," he breathed. But even as he said it, his thumb traced along her jaw, gentle despite the visible tension coiling through his body. His nostrils flared as he inhaled, and Elena watched gold consume silver entirely, watched the predator surface through those ancient eyes, watched 200 years of cold control crack apart in a single breath. "Everyone out!" The command cracked through the throne room like a whip. Elena heard the scramble of movement, the rustle of fabric, the hurried footsteps of courtiers and guards fleeing their king's suddenly volatile presence. Doors slammed in the distance. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches and the thundering of Elena's heart. Dante released her chin, stepping back as if he'd been burned. His chest heaved beneath his velvet coat, gold eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that should have terrified her. It did terrify her. But beneath the terror, her wolf purred with satisfaction, with rightness, with the bone-deep certainty that this male, this powerful, dangerous, impossible male, belonged to her. "Who are you?" His voice had dropped to something rough and raw, stripped of its earlier command. What pack? What? He stopped, jaw clenching, visibly fighting for control. You carry another male's scent. His child. The words should have hurt. They did hurt. A sharp reminder of everything Marcus had done, everything she'd lost. But beneath the pain, something strange sparked in Elena's chest. Jealousy. He was jealous. The Alpha King, who hadn't taken a mate in 2 centuries, was standing before her with gold eyes and clenched fists, and he was jealous of the male who had discarded her like garbage. My husband, Elena heard herself say, her voice cracked and hoarse. Former husband. He cast me out, declared me rogue. The baby is his, but he claims otherwise. Something dark passed through Dante's expression. His claws extended slightly, pricking through the tips of his fingers before he forced them to retract. His name. Marcus. Alpha Marcus of... I know who he is. Dante turned away sharply, pacing toward the dais before spinning back to face her. A minor alpha with delusions of importance? He declared his mate rogue while she carried his child? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Dante's laugh was hollow, bitter. And the moon goddess sends you to me. His discarded Luna, pregnant with another male's pup, stumbling into my territory on the same night my advisors finally demanded I choose a queen from their carefully curated selection of appropriate females. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture carrying 200 years of exhaustion. She has a cruel sense of humor, our goddess. I don't understand what's happening. Elena's voice emerged smaller than she intended, stripped of the dignity she'd been trying to maintain. My wolf. She's never. This doesn't make sense. No. Dante crossed the distance between them again, and this time when he crouched before her, bringing himself to her level, there was something almost gentle in his movements. It makes perfect sense. The cruelest kind of sense. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements, and brushed a strand of ice-crusted hair from her face. The touch sent warmth cascading down her spine, and Elena's breath caught as her wolf pressed toward his hand with desperate longing. You're my mate, Dante said quietly. The bond recognized you the moment our eyes met. I felt it. I suspect you felt it too. 200 years I've waited, and the goddess sends me a pregnant, half-frozen rogue fleeing for her life. A ghost of something that might have been humor flickered across his harsh features. Though I suppose that's fitting. I was never destined for simple happiness. I can't. Elena's mind refused to process what he was saying. You're the Alpha King. I'm nothing. I'm less than nothing. My own mate threw me away like... He was not your mate. Dante's voice hardened. He was a mistake. A wrong turn that led you here, to where you were always supposed to be. Before Elena could respond, her vision wavered. The exhaustion she'd been holding at bay crashed over her like a wave, dragging her toward darkness. She felt herself sway, felt strong arms catch her before she hit the marble, felt the impossible warmth of him surrounding her as consciousness fled. The last thing she registered was his voice, soft against her hair. I have you. Rest now. You're safe. Elena woke to warmth. For a long moment she simply lay still, cataloging sensations, soft sheets beneath her cheek, a fire crackling somewhere nearby, the absence of cold, of fear, of the constant adrenaline that had driven her through the forest. Then memory returned, and she bolted upright with a gasp. The room that greeted her eyes was larger than the entire cottage she'd grown up in. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting wolves running beneath silver moons. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing behind an ornate iron grate. The bed she occupied could have held 6 people comfortably, its canopy draped in fabrics the color of midnight. The queen's chambers. Elena's hand flew to her stomach, panic spiking through her chest. The baby? Was the baby? Your child is unharmed. She spun toward the voice, her heart hammering. Dante stood near the doorway, his posture rigid, maintaining careful distance from the bed. He'd changed since the throne room. Simpler clothes now, dark trousers and a loose white shirt that somehow made him appear more dangerous, more real. The healer examined you while you slept, he continued. The silver exposure was minimal. The baby's heartbeat is strong. His jaw tightened. As is your wolf's stubbornness. You should have been dead in that forest. Elena's hands shook as she clutched the blankets to her chest. Where am I? The Queen's chambers. His mouth twisted slightly. There will be scandal, of course. An unmated rogue given the most sacred rooms in the palace. My advisors are already composing their objections. Why? Dante's gold-flecked eyes met hers. Because you are my mate. And whatever the circumstances of your arrival, whatever complications your pregnancy creates, I will not see you housed like a prisoner or servant. He paused. Unless you prefer other accommodations, I will not force anything upon you. The words carried weight that Elena didn't fully understand. She watched him, this powerful, ancient king, standing in the doorway of her chambers with tension coiling through every line of his body, and realized he was waiting for her to reject him. You could take what you wanted, she said quietly. You're the Alpha King. No one would stop you. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or old weariness. Yes, I could. He moved to the fireplace, keeping his back to her, staring into the flames. I have done many terrible things in 200 years of ruling these lands. I have killed and conquered and destroyed when necessary. But I have never, his voice roughened, never taken what was not freely given. The mate bond does not change that. Elena's wolf pressed against her ribs, urging her toward him with gentle insistence. She remained where she was, trying to reconcile the stories she'd heard. The cold, merciless Alpha King, with the male who had caught her when she fell and placed her in the Queen's chambers, and now stood with his back to her because he feared she would see him as a threat. I had nightmares, she whispered. In the forest. I dreamed Marcus was there, telling me I was worthless, that the baby was an abomination. I've been having that dream since he cast me out. Dante's shoulders tensed. Did I? Elena swallowed. Did I wake screaming? Silence stretched between them. Then, without turning. 3 times. The healer offered sedatives. I declined on your behalf. I didn't know what effects they might have on the pregnancy. You were here? While I slept? Now he did turn, and Elena saw something vulnerable beneath the ancient power in his eyes. I sat outside the door. I couldn't... He stopped, jaw working. The bond makes it difficult to be far from you, to hear you in distress and not respond. Elena stared at him. The Alpha King, who hadn't taken a mate in 2 centuries, had spent the night sitting outside her door, guarding a pregnant rogue he'd known for mere hours, because her nightmares caused him pain through a bond she still couldn't fully accept, was real. I'm going to cause problems for you, she said. Political problems. The pregnancy. My status as rogue. Whatever Marcus tells people about why he cast me out. You should distance yourself. Dante's laugh was soft, almost surprised. You've been conscious for 5 minutes and you're already trying to protect me from scandal. He shook his head, something warm entering his gaze. Rest now. We will discuss politics and complications tomorrow. Tonight, you are safe. That is all that matters. He moved toward the door, and Elena's wolf keened at the impending separation. She pushed the instinct down, but not before Dante paused, his hand on the doorframe. Call out if you need anything, he said quietly. I will hear you. The door closed behind him, and Elena sank back against the pillows, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Mate. The word kept echoing through her thoughts, impossible and terrifying, and somehow, despite everything, threaded with the faintest whisper of hope. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, and for one disorienting moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The forest, the capture, the throne room, him. And she sat up too quickly, her head spinning. The Queen's chambers. She was in the Alpha King's palace, in rooms meant for a Luna who didn't exist, carrying a child whose father had declared her dead. And somewhere in this sprawling stone fortress, her mate was waiting. Mate. The word still felt foreign, impossible. She pressed her palm to her chest where the bond pulsed like a second heartbeat, warm and insistent. Her wolf stirred at the sensation, pressing forward with eager recognition that Elena couldn't share. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She'd trusted once before. She'd given everything to Marcus, her heart, her future, her body, and he'd thrown her away, like refuse. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Elena tensed, but the scent that drifted under the door was unfamiliar. Female, sharp with something floral, underlaid with an acrid note that made her wolf's hackles rise. "Enter!" Elena called, pulling the covers higher over her thin shift. The door swung open to reveal a woman who made Elena feel small and plain by comparison. Tall, willowy, with hair the color of midnight and eyes like chips of obsidian. She wore a gown of deep crimson that clung to curves Elena could never hope to possess, and she moved with the liquid grace of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "So," the woman's voice was silk over steel. "You're the rogue everyone's whispering about." Elena straightened her spine. "I don't believe we've met." "Lady Iris Darkhollow." The name was offered like a blade, casually lethal. "I've been a fixture at this court for longer than your entire bloodline has existed, girl. I've counseled kings and watched dynasties crumble." She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "And I've spent the last century ensuring that when Dante finally chose a queen, it would be me." The words landed like stones in Elena's stomach. A century of positioning, of scheming, of waiting, and Elena had stumbled into the middle of it, pregnant and powerless. "I'm not here to take anything from you," Elena said carefully. "I didn't ask for this. Any of it." "No?" Iris moved closer, and Elena caught that acrid scent again, stronger now. Something chemical, something wrong. "You didn't ask to be found on our borders, conveniently unconscious, conveniently pregnant, conveniently recognized as the mate of the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. It wasn't convenient?" Iris laughed, the sound brittle. "Oh, I'm sure your sob story is very compelling. The poor rejected Luna, cast out by her cruel husband, finding salvation in the arms of a king." Her eyes hardened. "Do you know how many females have tried to trap Dante over the centuries? How many schemes and seductions and desperate ploys I've watched fail?" Elena's wolf snarled beneath her skin, but she held herself still. "I'm not trying to trap anyone. I just want to survive long enough to have my child." Something flickered in Iris's expression. Calculation, perhaps, or reassessment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. "Then perhaps we can help each other. I know this court, its dangers and its players. You're alone here, with enemies you can't even see yet. I could guide you, protect you even." Lies. Elena's wolf pressed the warning forward with absolute certainty. "She reeks of deception." "That's very kind," Elena said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll consider your offer." Iris's smile returned, sharper now. "Do. But don't take too long, little rogue. This court devours the weak, and you're bleeding vulnerability from every pore." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and congratulations on your pregnancy. I do hope the child survives. These things can be so fragile." The door closed behind her, and Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking. Her wolf was pacing, agitated, screaming warnings she couldn't fully translate into words. Danger. That female is danger. Elena believed it. The days that followed fell into an uneasy pattern. Elena learned the rhythms of the palace, breakfast in her chambers, walks through gardens she was too nervous to fully appreciate, dinners in the great hall where 100 eyes tracked her every movement, and always, always, the whispers followed her like smoke. Rogue, pregnant, unworthy. She heard them in the corridors, saw them in the sideways glances of nobles who couldn't believe their cold, perfect king had been bound to something so insignificant. Most kept their distance, but Elena felt their scrutiny like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Dante was a constant, unexpected presence. He appeared at odd moments, when Elena was studying in the library, when she walked the frost-covered gardens, when she sat alone in her chambers staring at the fire and trying not to think about all the ways this could end badly. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply was there, a steady warmth at the edge of her awareness, his scent becoming familiar enough that her wolf stopped snarling every time he approached. "You're hovering," Elena said one afternoon, 3 days after her arrival. They were in the garden, and she'd been pretending to examine a dormant rosebush while he pretended not to be watching her. "I'm supervising the garden staff," Dante said mildly. Elena glanced around at the conspicuously empty paths. "There's no one else here." "Then they're doing an excellent job of being unobtrusive." A hint of warmth entered his voice. "I can leave if my presence disturbs you." The offer was genuine. She could hear it in his tone, feel it through the tentative thread of their bond. If she asked him to go, he would go. No argument, no wounded pride, no demands for explanation. It was so different from everything she'd known that Elena didn't know how to respond. "Stay," she said quietly, and watched something ease in his expression. I'm not used to this. To someone wanting to be near me without wanting something from me." Dante was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "May I tell you something?" Elena nodded. "Before the mate bond, before the recognition in the throne room," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "When my wolves brought word of a pregnant rogue captured at the border, I intended to have you questioned and released. Perhaps given supplies, directions to unclaimed territory where you could den safely. I had no intention of— Of what? Of caring." The word came out harsh, almost angry. "I've spent 200 years building walls around myself, convincing myself that I was complete alone, that I needed no one. And then you looked at me with those terrified eyes, and I felt something I'd forgotten I was capable of feeling." Elena's heart clenched. She understood, more than she wanted to admit. The walls, the conviction that vulnerability was weakness, the certainty that caring only led to pain. "You caught me," she whispered, "when I collapsed. You didn't have to do that." "No." Dante's eyes met hers and she saw gold flickering in their silver depths. "I had to. My body moved before my mind could object. One moment I was standing at my throne, and the next I was across the room with you in my arms." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I don't lose control. I haven't lost control in over a century, and yet with you, I become someone I don't recognize." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications Elena wasn't ready to examine. She should be afraid, should be guarding herself against another heartbreak. But when she looked at this ancient, powerful king who was confessing his vulnerability to her like a supplicant, all she felt was the tentative unfurling of something she'd thought Marcus had killed. Hope. "I had a dream last night," she said. "Not a nightmare. I dreamed I was standing in a meadow and there was a child, maybe 4 or 5, with silver eyes and dark hair. They were laughing, running toward someone. Her voice caught. Running toward you. Dante went very still. Elena, I'm not saying I trust you. I'm not saying I'm ready for any of this. She forced herself to meet his gaze. But I'm saying I dreamed of a future where I wasn't alone. Where my child wasn't alone. And for the first time since Marcus cast me out, I didn't wake up feeling like death would be easier. The sound that escaped Dante's throat was almost a growl, almost a sob. He took a single step toward her, then stopped, his hands clenching at his sides, as if he was fighting against every instinct he possessed. I want to hold you, he said roughly. I want to wrap myself around you until you forget what it felt like to be cold and afraid. I want to track down the male who did this to you and tear him apart with my bare hands. His eyes blazed gold. But I will do none of those things unless you ask, unless you want them. I will stand here and burn with wanting until you tell me otherwise. Elena's wolf surged toward him with a keening cry she barely contained. Her skin felt too tight, too sensitive, every nerve ending aware of the 3 feet of frozen ground between them. I'm not ready, she said, and watched him accept it without flinching. But I'm starting to think, maybe I could be, someday. Dante's exhale was ragged. Then someday is enough. Someday is more than I ever thought I'd have. The summons to dinner that evening carried an edge of formality Elena hadn't felt before. A servant delivered the message with downcast eyes and trembling hands, and Elena's wolf immediately went on alert. Something was wrong. She dressed carefully in one of the gowns that had appeared in her wardrobe, simple blue silk that didn't cling to her growing belly but didn't hide it either. When she entered the great hall, she understood the servant's nervousness immediately. The room was full. Not just courtiers and advisors, but representatives from half a dozen allied pacts, all watching her entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. And at their center, seated at a place of honor near the king's table, was Lady Iris Darkhollow. "Ah, our guest of honor arrives." Iris's voice carried across the hall, silencing conversation. "Come, dear, we've been waiting." Elena felt 100 gazes pin her in place. Her wolf bristled, sensing the trap but unable to see its shape. She forced herself to walk forward to keep her head high even as whispers erupted in her wake. Rogue, pregnant, unworthy. She was halfway to the king's table when Iris stood, her crimson gown flowing like blood around her. "I must say, I've been curious about you since your arrival." Iris circled Elena slowly, forcing her to turn to keep the woman in sight. "The little Luna who wasn't enough for her own husband. Tell me, was he very angry when he discovered the child wasn't his?" The hall went deathly silent. Elena's blood turned to ice. "The child is his. He lied." "Did he?" Iris smiled, sweet as poison. "How convenient. A perfect victim narrative for a perfect scheme. But I've done some research, you see. Sent riders to the southern territories to learn about our mysterious guest." She produced a sealed letter, holding it aloft. "Would you like to know what I discovered?" "Iris." Dante's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. He was on his feet, gold bleeding into his eyes, fury radiating from every line of his body. "Enough." "But my king, surely you want to know the truth about your so-called mate?" Iris's innocent expression didn't waver. She was seen with another male before her wedding, a warrior from a neighboring pack. They were quite close. Lies. All of it was lies, but Elena could see doubt creeping into the faces around her, could feel the tide of opinion shifting against her. "That's not true," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was never unfaithful. Marcus fabricated everything because he wanted an excuse to be rid of me." "A breeding whore's word against a mated alpha's?" Iris laughed, high and brittle. "I think we all know which carries more weight." "Enough." Dante was moving now, descending from the dais with predatory grace. The crowd parted before him like water. Lady Darkhollow, you forget yourself. This female is under my protection, my mate. And you will speak of her with respect, or you will not speak at all. Iris's composure cracked for just a moment, something ugly flashing in her eyes before the mask slid back into place. Of course, my king. I merely thought you should know the character of the female claiming your bond, before any permanent decisions were made. There are no decisions to make. Dante stopped beside Elena, and she felt the warmth of him against her side, steadying her. The moon goddess chose her. That is not a matter for debate. The moon goddess has been known to test us, Iris said softly. Perhaps this is your test, my king. To see if you can resist a pretty face and tragic story long enough to see the truth beneath. Dante's hand found Elena's, his fingers intertwining with hers in a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. The only truth I see is a jealous female who has finally revealed her nature. His voice dropped to something dangerous. You have overstepped, Iris. Badly. I suggest you use the remainder of this evening to consider how you might regain my favor, because at this moment, it hangs by a thread. Iris's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. With a curtsy that was barely civil, she retreated to her seat. But as she went, her eyes met Elena's, and the hatred in them made Elena's wolf recoil. This wasn't over. It was barely beginning. Dante led her to the king's table, pulling out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy that made her chest ache. When she was seated, he leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't expect her to move so publicly, so boldly. She's not going to stop, Elena whispered back. She's been planning this for a century. No. Dante's hand covered hers on the table, warm and steady. She won't stop. But neither will I. His eyes blazed with protective fury. You are mine, Elena, and I protect what's mine. The words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. For the first time since her wedding night, Elena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. But across the hall, Iris Darkhollow was watching them with murder in her eyes and a smile on her poisoned lips. The tea arrived each morning without fail. Elena had grown accustomed to the small rituals of palace life in the week since Iris's public humiliation, the servants who brought her meals, the guards who stood watch outside her door, the healer who checked on her baby's progress every evening. The tea was simply part of that routine, a fragrant blend that one of the kitchen staff claimed would ease the nausea that still plagued her mornings. She didn't think to question it, not until the third day, when the weakness began. It started as exhaustion, the kind she'd attributed to pregnancy and stress. But by the fifth day, Elena couldn't climb the stairs to her chambers without stopping to rest. By the seventh, she woke to find blood on her sheets. No, she whispered, her hands flying to her stomach. No, no, no. The cramping hit her like a fist, doubling her over. Her wolf howled in anguish, clawing at her consciousness with desperate fury. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, horribly wrong with their pup. Elena tried to call for help, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. The room spun around her, colors bleeding together, and she realized with dawning horror that she couldn't feel her legs properly. Poison. The word surfaced through the fog of pain and fear. She'd been poisoned, slowly and deliberately, and she'd drunk every drop without suspicion. Her hand fumbled for the cup still sitting on her bedside table. This morning's tea, barely touched. She brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply, forcing her wolf forward despite the agony, demanding answers. Beneath the mint and chamomile, so faint that human senses would never catch it, lurked something bitter. Something that smelled like dying flowers and rotting dreams. Wolfsbane. Elena's vision swam. She had to tell someone, had to warn Dante, had to... The door opened, and Iris Darkhollow swept into the room. "Oh dear," Iris said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You don't look well at all, little Luna. Should I fetch the healer?" She closed the door behind her, and the lock clicked with terrible finality. "No, I don't think I will." Elena tried to rise, but her body refused to cooperate. She slumped against the pillows, her hand still pressed protectively over her belly. "You," she managed. "The tea. Clever girl. Took you long enough." Iris circled the bed like a predator examining wounded prey. Wolfsbane extract, diluted just enough to work slowly. By tomorrow, you'll lose the baby. By next week, you'll be too weak to leave this room. And our dear king will be so devastated by your tragic illness that he'll need comfort. He'll know. Elena's voice was barely audible. He'll smell it on me. Will he? Iris smiled. I've been very careful. The dosing, the timing. By the time anyone thinks to check, the evidence will be long gone. Just another sad case of a rogue's body rejecting a pregnancy. It happens, you know. The stress of everything you've been through. She clicked her tongue in mock sympathy. No one will blame you for being too weak to carry a child. Elena's wolf surged against her skin, desperate and furious, but her body was failing, the poison burning through her veins, and she couldn't shift, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but lie there and watch her enemy gloat. "Why?" she whispered. "You could have had any male. I don't want any male." Iris's composure cracked, revealing the obsession beneath. "I want him. I've wanted him for 100 years. Watched him reject female after female, waiting for my chance. And then you stumbled out of the forest. Pregnant, pathetic, worthless. And he looked at you like you hung the moon." Her voice rose to something unhinged. "You don't deserve him. You don't deserve any of this." Elena's hand found the teacup. It wasn't much of a weapon. But as Iris leaned closer, close enough that Elena could smell the rage seeping from her pores, Elena gathered every scrap of strength she had left and hurled the contents into her enemy's face. Iris screamed, clawing at her eyes. The wolfsbane tea wouldn't hurt her the way it was hurting Elena. It wasn't concentrated enough. But the hot liquid and the shock bought Elena precious seconds. She rolled off the bed, hitting the floor hard, and dragged herself toward the door. "You bitch!" Iris snarled, recovering faster than Elena had hoped. A hand caught Elena's ankle, nails digging into flesh. "You're going to die tonight. I was going to let it be peaceful, let you fade away in your sleep. But now I think I'll make it hurt." Elena's fingers found the edge of the rug, the corner of the dresser. She pulled herself forward inch by agonizing inch, her wolf lending her strength she no longer possessed alone. The bond, she realized suddenly. The mate bond. It was still incomplete. They hadn't marked each other, but it was there. A golden thread connecting her to Dante, pulsing with his presence somewhere in the palace. Elena reached for it with everything she had, poured her terror and her pain and her desperate love for the child inside her into that fragile connection. "Help me, please, help me." Iris's weight landed on her back, driving the breath from her lungs. Hands closed around Elena's throat. The door exploded inward. Dante Silvermane stood in the wreckage, his eyes blazing pure gold, his claws extended, and his wolf riding so close to the surface that his features had gone feral. A snarl ripped from his chest that shook the walls, that made Iris's hands go slack with primal terror. "Get away from my mate!" Iris scrambled backward, her composure shattered. "My king, she attacked me. I felt it." Dante's voice was barely human. "I felt her fear through the bond, her pain." He stalked forward, and Iris pressed herself against the wall, trembling. "What have you done?" "Nothing! I've done nothing!" But Elena was hauling herself upright, clutching the bedpost for support, and the words poured from her despite the agony. "The tea. She's been poisoning my tea for a week. Wolfsbane extract. She wanted to kill the baby. Dante's gaze snapped to the cup still dripping on the floor. He crossed to it in 2 strides, lifted it to his nose, and inhaled. When he turned back to Iris, death lived in his eyes. "You dare," he said softly. "You dare harm my mate, my child." "It's not yours," Iris screamed, abandoning all pretense. "She's a whore and a liar, and that bastard in her belly isn't—" Dante's hand closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet. "Wait!" Elena gasped. "Dante, wait!" He paused, his claws pricking Iris's skin, confusion flickering through the rage. Elena forced herself to stand fully, to face them both despite her shaking legs. "If you kill her now, the Dark Hollow faction will claim you acted without proof. They'll say I manipulated you, that you murdered a noble lady for a rogue's lies." She swallowed hard. "There needs to be witnesses. There needs to be truth that no one can deny." Understanding dawned in Dante's eyes. His grip on Iris's throat loosened, not releasing, but no longer crushing. "The solstice gathering," he said slowly. "Tonight, the moon witness altar will be active." Elena nodded, exhaustion and pain threatening to drag her under. Blood memories. The moon goddess's judgment. Let everyone see what she's done. Iris's face went white as snow. "No, no, you can't. I am the Alpha King." Dante's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "I can do whatever I wish. And what I wish, Lady Darkhollow, is for every wolf in this kingdom to witness your treachery." He called for guards, called for the healer. Within moments, Elena was being swept up in his arms, carried toward the healing chambers while Iris was dragged away in silver chains. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and terror. The healer worked frantically, forcing antidotes down Elena's throat, pressing poultices to her belly. Through it all, Dante stayed at her side, his hand wrapped around hers, his presence anchoring her to consciousness when the darkness tried to pull her under. "The baby," she kept asking. "Please, is the baby—" "Fighting," the healer said at last, exhaustion and hope warring in her voice. "Your child is fighting, my queen. The heartbeat is steady." Elena sobbed with relief. Dante pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged, his control hanging by a thread. "I should have known," he said roughly. "I should have protected you better." "You came when I called." Elena touched his face with trembling fingers. "You felt me through the bond." "I will always feel you." His eyes blazed gold. "Always come for you. Nothing in this world will keep me from your side." The solstice gathering convened at moonrise. Elena had to be carried to the great hall, still too weak to walk, but she refused to remain in bed while her fate was decided without her. Dante settled her in a chair beside the moon witness altar, a shallow pool of water that reflected the night sky, enchanted to show truth under the goddess's light. The hall was packed. Every noble family, every pack representative, every wolf who held power in the northern territories had come to witness what promised to be the scandal of the century. Iris Darkhollow stood in chains before the altar, her beautiful face contorted with fear and fury. Behind her, members of her faction shifted uneasily, uncertain whether to defend her or distance themselves. "Lady Iris Darkhollow," Dante announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You stand accused of attempted murder, of poisoning the Alpha King's mate with wolfsbane extract, of attempting to kill an innocent child." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "These are serious charges, my king." An older male stepped forward, Lord Darkhollow himself, Iris's father. "My daughter is many things, but she is no murderer. This rogue female has clearly manipulated." "Then let the moon goddess decide." Elena's voice rang out stronger than she felt. She rose from her chair, swaying but determined. "I offer my blood memories to the altar. Let every wolf present see the truth through divine vision." Silence fell. The moon witness ritual was ancient, sacred, and absolute. No wolf could lie when the goddess's light flowed through them. No memory could be falsified or hidden. You wouldn't dare, Iris hissed. Your own secrets will be revealed. Your infidelity, your lies. I have no secrets. Elena crossed to the altar, ignoring her body's screams of protest. I have only truth. And unlike you, I'm not afraid of it. She drew a small blade across her palm, letting blood drip into the silver water. The pool began to glow, moonlight intensifying until it was almost too bright to look upon. And then the visions came. Every wolf in the hall saw it. Iris in the palace kitchen, adding drops of wolfsbane extract to Elena's tea. Iris sneaking into Elena's chambers to check the dosing. Iris's whispered conversations with a servant about timing and symptoms. You were supposed to die quietly, you worthless rogue. The memory Iris's voice echoed through the hall, making the real Iris flinch. A miscarriage, a tragic illness, and I would finally have what I've earned. The visions faded, the pool stilled, and every eye in the hall turned to Lady Iris Darkhollow with revulsion. The moon goddess has shown us truth, Dante said, his voice ringing with finality. Lady Iris Darkhollow is guilty of attempted murder. The sentence is death. No! Iris screamed, struggling against her chains. You can't. My family. I was doing it for us, Dante, for our future. That rogue doesn't deserve you. She doesn't deserve any of this. The moon goddess chose her. Elena stepped forward, and something ancient seemed to settle over her shoulders, a mantle of authority she'd never worn before. She chose me as his mate. She chose this child to live, and she has judged you. For a moment, their eyes met. Iris's, wild with madness and hate. Elena's, steady and sure. You were never going to be his queen, Elena said softly. Not because of me, because there is no love in your heart. Only hunger, only obsession. She turned to Dante. I don't need to see her die, but I need the kingdom to know that attacking an Alpha King's mate has consequences. Dante's claws extended. It does. The execution was swift, a single strike that severed Iris's head from her body. She crumpled before the throne, her blood spreading across the stone floor, witnessed by every noble and representative in the Northern Territories. Lord Darkhollow stepped forward, his face ashen. For a moment Elena tensed, expecting a challenge, but the old lord simply knelt, pressing his forehead to the floor. The Darkhollow faction accepts the goddess's judgment, he said hoarsely. We offer our loyalty to the Alpha King and his mate, without reservation. One by one, the other nobles followed. Within minutes, the entire hall was kneeling, not to Dante alone, but to Elena as well. The walk back to the healing chambers seemed endless. Elena's strength gave out halfway there, and Dante swept her into his arms without breaking stride. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, pine and snow and something uniquely him, and let herself finally, fully collapse. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. Terrifying and magnificent. I was terrified, she admitted, the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. He laid her gently on the bed, settling beside her. It's doing what must be done despite it. The healer checked her once more, pronouncing the baby stable and Elena on the mend, then discreetly withdrew. The door closed behind her, and suddenly Elena and Dante were alone in the soft candlelight. Elena, his voice was rough. I need to mark you. He broke off, visibly struggling for control. Tonight almost destroyed me. Feeling your fear through an incomplete bond, not knowing if I'd reach you in time, I cannot survive that again. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I know. I'm asking. He reached for her hand, pressed it against his chest where his heart beat frantically beneath her palm. I need you to want this too. Need you to choose me, Not because the goddess decreed it, but because you've been sleeping outside my door for a week, she finished softly. Because you defended me when you had no reason to believe I was worth defending. Because you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. She drew his hand to her own chest, letting him feel her heartbeat racing to match his. I choose you, Dante. I choose us. The sound he made was half growl, half prayer. He gathered her close, burying his face in the curve of her neck, inhaling deeply. I need to taste you, he said against her skin. Need to feel you become mine in the way that can never be undone. Then do it. She tilted her head, offering him the junction of her neck and shoulder. Make me yours. His teeth grazed her skin first, testing, teasing, building the anticipation until she was trembling in his arms. She felt his wolf pressing forward, felt the predator in him struggling against 2 centuries of iron control. Then he bit down. Pain lanced through her, sharp and bright, but it transformed almost instantly into something else. Pleasure flooded her veins, golden and warm, spreading from the mark outward until every inch of her body hummed with it. She felt him through the bond, really felt him. His centuries of loneliness, his desperate hope, his overwhelming love crashing over her like waves. Mine, his wolf snarled through their connection. Finally, forever, mine. But Elena wasn't finished. She pulled back, her eyes meeting his. Gold swirled through the silver of his irises, his breathing ragged. My turn, she whispered. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, hope, wonder. Alpha kings weren't marked by their mates. It wasn't done. The power imbalance. I don't care about tradition, Elena said, reading his thoughts through their new bond. I don't care about power imbalances. You're mine too. The world needs to know it. She rose up, pressing her lips to his shoulder first, feeling his muscles tense beneath her touch. Then she let her own wolf surge forward, let her teeth extend, and bit down on the junction of his neck and shoulder. Dante's roar shook the walls. Through the bond, she felt his shock transmute to ecstasy. Felt barriers he'd maintained for 200 years crumble like ancient stone. Felt him give himself to her as completely as she'd given herself to him. Yours, her wolf sang. Always, everything, yours. When she released him, they collapsed together on the bed, tangled in each other's arms. The marks on their shoulders pulsed with golden light, mirror images of claiming and belonging. Mine. Dante breathed against her throat. Yours, she answered. Mate. They said it together, and the word resonated through their bond like a bell, sealing them in a way nothing could ever break. They lay there for a long time, simply holding each other. Elena felt the bond settling into her bones, weaving itself through every part of her until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. The baby felt it, she said suddenly, touching her belly. When the bond completed, there was a flutter, like joy. Dante's hand covered hers, protective and reverent. Our child will know nothing but love, he promised. Will never feel abandoned or rejected. Will never doubt their worth. Elena's eyes stung with tears. I was so afraid, she admitted. When Marcus cast me out, I thought I was broken. Thought no one would ever want me. His loss. Dante pressed a kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. His unforgivable loss, and my impossible gain. 3 weeks later, Elena stood before the assembled Pax as Dante placed a crown on her head. Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, mate to the Alpha King, mother of the future heir. The child inside her had grown strong, the healer reported. Stronger than any pregnancy she'd seen. The wolfsbane should have killed them both, but Elena's wolf had fought for her baby with everything she had. The moon goddess, it seemed, protected her chosen. I present to you, Dante announced, his voice carrying across the great hall. My mate. My queen. My heart. Luna Elena Silvermane. The crowd erupted in cheers. Elena saw faces that had once looked at her with suspicion now shining with approval. The rogue had become royalty. The rejected had become revered. But the title mattered less than the warmth of Dante's hand in hers, the steady pulse of their bond, gold and unbreakable. The future she'd glimpsed in her dream, a child with silver eyes running through a sunlit meadow, felt closer now. Possible. Inevitable. That night, alone in the chambers they now shared, Dante held her close and whispered secrets he'd never told anyone, the centuries of loneliness, the mates he'd rejected because none of them felt right, the advisors who'd begged him to choose, to produce an heir, to secure the succession. I was waiting for you, he said. I didn't know it then, but some part of me knew you were coming. Elena traced the mark on his shoulder. Her mark, healing but permanent. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. No. He smiled, and the expression transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly beautiful. She doesn't. Through their bond, Elena felt his happiness like sunlight on her skin, felt his love like a warm blanket wrapped around her soul. She had lost everything: her home, her pack, her identity. But in losing everything, she had found something infinitely more precious. She had found where she belonged,